Welcome back to the Transformation Leaders Podcast. I'm Sean. I am joined here today by the wonderful co-host that I have, David Soden. And we're here to talk today about something that I see a lot of people talk about, which is automation, right? Everybody knows all the wonderful things that you get out of it, but I think it's a really good opportunity, and David's done a great job talking about the flip side. So, David, can you take over and talk about the true cost of automation?
Yeah, no, appreciate it. Thanks, Sean. So, this is the message is automation, or at least rooted in it. But there's a much bigger tell or much bigger story here that is lurking in the news. I'm sure most of you have heard of it. If not, then that's the point of these podcasts, to try to catch up and show you what's out there. And so right now, there's this, Sean and I have been talking and beating our drum for, it feels like a year and a half now, to where don't fire the humans, keep the humans in the loop. AI should help and be an assistant. And so some companies have gone to the other side, the dark side, and claims, although Sean and I debate this wildly, as to what the underlying real reason is. It really AI, or is it an excuse to kind of masquerade maybe some bad purchasing decisions over the years and say this is why we're cutting costs because of our AI success, when in reality they're just unfortunately hiring offshore, either nearshore, onshore, or some sort of visa situation that just lowers their operating costs, but they're still using humans. And you'd think AI is replacing it. I can't remember. There was a big news cycle about this time last year about a company said it was 100% AI owned and run, and not owned, but run. And you think of the Wizard of Oz, right? You peek behind the curtain and guess what? There's a whole bunch of outsourced employees running the company. And so this is kind of the illusion of what we try to do to get through all of this stuff. And so, if we look at this right here, the true cost of automation, why humans are still cheaper than AI. And then the card that we got here, 77% of those tasks are still cheaper if they're done by humans. And this is really part of the big problem here, is that they're sending stuff that should be an algorithm, stuff that still should be regular, normal automation. And they're just throwing AI into it, either because of pressure from above in operations, where they're being mandated to use AI as often as much as they can. And this has been the insult to injury. So when you look at this, sometimes keeping a human in the loop is not only cheaper, it's more efficient, maybe safer from a governance standpoint, but at other points, even if the human isn't doing it, it doesn't always need to have AI. And the problem that we heard in the news cycles with AI is when you try to have AI do a deterministic thing, you find that it often does the opposite or variations of the opposite. And you're kind of sort of there, but there's always these snafus, and just, it's a source of pain and contention, unfortunately. So Sean and I have been putting out multiple fires over the years as a result of these types of situations, and either fixing or building or realigning or consulting to some extent all of these different business processes and how they kind of unfold. And so if we look at this compute versus compensation as an inflection point, and more importantly, I want to call out Brian's comment here. It says, for my team, the cost of compute is far beyond the cost of employees. Another recent news cycle, you've heard of Oracle, 30,000 people being laid off. Well, the underlying truth to that was supposedly it boiled down to where they needed compute. They needed servers to run their operation for AI. And it was much easier to, or the low-hanging fruit, according to senior management, was to let go of those 30,000 people, take that salary, invest it into infrastructure, and now you've got servers. But at the end of the day, whatever they let go in the 30,000, it's going to balloon, and it's going to balloon quickly. You're seeing here that in 4 months, Uber burned through its entire 2026 budget in roughly 4 months. And that's what the developers, like, they had a pool, they had, an allocation and a budget. And because they're not using AI in the most efficient way, or they're just throwing essentially AI at the wall, at everything, things that it shouldn't need to be there. They weren't selectively picking and cherry picking. Where is the best value for this? Where should it end up being? And because of that, they just, again, threw no caution to the wall, just said, give it to AI and let AI run with it. And even if it works and you get the deterministic nature, every time that runs, we got a problem. The meter's running. And yes, the cost per run is going down. But if the volume of the low cost is going up, then this is the problem. And this is where this paradox comes into play. I'm going to actually skip ahead because I want to bring out this point. We can skip back to OpenAI and Anthropic's quote. But this Jevons paradox describes this very problem that I'm talking about, where we're saying you've got the AI cost. Every time I run it, it's going down. So let's just say the meter runs at 50 cents and it's gone down, 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 down over time, which then makes it maybe a nickel. And so that's a 45-cent decrease in price each time you run it. So now adoption goes through the roof and AI engineers are throwing stuff at the wall. And now we got this huge volume, and that's how they've gotten into this pickle. And that brings us full circle to the full walk back that you're seeing from Dario on Claude or Anthropic. And what Sam's talking about, both of them have pretty much said in various ways that essentially AI is going to replace humans and humans are going to be displaced. And there's some truth in that. But the bottom line is the reality where we are today is now they're walking that statement back. And so people often wonder, is the word on the street some sort of nefarious marketing scheme to where they're sitting there trying to get everybody to use it, That's the adoption problem that every new technology has. And then when mass adoption happens, then all of a sudden now the truth comes out, the price constraints, the discounts go away, and then you're left with reality of what this thing really costs. Because, OpenAI I don't think they've been profitable for I don't know how many years. But this is the issue. And so now they're walking it back, trying to look like the good guys again, saying, oh, no, don't worry about it. Humans are going to be here. And we understand that, the prices are costing more and more and more for companies. And it's not because their run costs are higher. Again, it's because of the amount of volume. Sean, what have you seen with the people and the customers that you're working on? Is this type of situation of cost and budgeting and overruns and maybe ping-ponging on decisions, whether or not we should fire the humans, have humans in the loop, or where does AI fit into this whole case today in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, for the majority of the people in the situations that I've talked to people about, for the most part, quote unquote, firing the humans is a failure of high quality management. That's what I'm seeing, because what this capability allows you to do is do what every company I have heard since I have been in business have heard. I want to do more with less. Yep. Right? And that's what this technology does. So what happens when we, as in the technologists of the world, provide a singular, robust, and completely generic answer to that business problem? Is they're like, okay, we just need fewer people. Well, in the news, I think it was CrowdStrike CEO came out and says, we need to get rid of the middle management. All they do is measure people, right? And there's a lot of flack he got for that. Middle management doesn't exist to tattle on the individual contributors. That's not what middle management is for. It allows you to grow your talent, qualify your talent, identify future leaders, and support them in their growth in the company, so that there is a deep bench when it comes down to the date that you do need to scale rapidly. You have those people ready. When you do have a situation where, as many of the customers I talk to have, they have people who are retiring out of the business, with a whole bunch of knowledge. So yeah, it comes down to automation is excellent, right? The best value you can get for the automation is to remove from human attention the things that AI can do incredibly well without surveillance.
Yep.
The second thing is how can we give AI as an augmentative skill set to our people to take the Tony Starks of the world and turn them into Iron Man, is what I like to say. But that's not what's happening. What's happening, at least from the people I have talked to, is that 2 years ago, the company said, we want to spend X amount of money on AI. This is your cost, David. And then 2 years later, they said, okay, show me what value you did for that budget. And there was no measurement. There were no management. There was no let's define a project and measure the outcome. All of this wasn't done in a lot of these organizations. So the only thing they could do is cut heads. Now, I've seen and heard lots of organizations who have gone through that process, and they're coming out the other end wiser and say, okay, we're going to start monitoring the individual contributors, what they're doing on a regular basis on their laptop, on their PC, whatever, and so that we can understand the value AI is providing so that we can document the improvement gains and so they can justify that spend. I believe this tranche of layoffs is simply because they spent money, they cannot justify it, and so I don't know what you know about business out there in the audience, but if you spend money that is not yours and they ask, what did you do with it, and you can't answer, consequences happen.
Usually not good.
So I think this should all be a lesson for all of our leaders out there. When you ask for money, you make sure you have a long, detailed record of where it's spent and what value it made for the business. Because if you do not, you're going to get a call one day. Now, I worked for a Fortune 500. I would get calls 2-3 years later and saying, Sean, we spent this money. You were responsible for it. What did we do? We've got corporate tax people asking us what value we did. We have this, we have that. And I was one of those guys who lived in SharePoint and had a long track record of everything I did, whatever I spent, and I did first engineering principles. I did high quality program project management. So I always had the paper trail. So when someone would call up, I would hand it to them and they're like, thanks, that's all I had. And it was a 30-second interaction or it was a single email interaction. Now, I think that is the root cause of a lot of the problems we see.
It is, and that is true. And if we, we look at some of the financial math here, this kind of will bring and shed some light, I'm hoping, at least into this dichotomy of what does it cost a human worker to, just be a human? And what does it cost to run the AI in the infrastructure and the system? And you can just sit here and look at the numbers and the contrasting where, you have fixed predictable costs, usually in the form of a salary, versus a very dynamic metered type of path forward. Now, as business slows, this is fine. You can control your costs potentially on this area, but there's still that overhead piece that you're always going to have. So I don't know. The math to me seems to be that, or the fix to me, at least when I'm talking to customers, look at what you're automating, look at what you're spending, look at the processes as a workflow, and think about it in an intelligent way, not how much stuff can I throw to AI to get it to fix, because everybody spent probably the last year, maybe not some that are early adopters, maybe spent 2, but they were all just throwing stuff at AI and making the prompts to get a deterministic outcome. That's like so hard and painful. And now they spent all of that time and energy. Now they're going to have to undo a lot of this stuff to yield the cost down and say, okay, is this something that could be done with an algorithm in a regular traditional automation sequence? Can a human that's here fulfill that without overloading whoever we have left, assuming maybe they let some people go historically because they did the transition? So there's a lot more work that we're going to see of this yin and yang, push and pull, and people on the fence. And then we're not even talking about the people that are the latecomers. They're not even dealing with AI. AI is like a 4-letter word in their company, and they're watching, sitting back, laughing, in some cases, watching everybody just spin and go around in circles. So, you know, at the same time, they're falling behind their competitors. And so I'm just trying to give you a peek of what's going on behind the curtain at each of these companies. So it's good, it's bad, it's ugly. Like, we see a little bit of everything and a whole mix of it. So the bottom line is only you know where you're at, but just follow the solutions and some advice that I was giving there, as well as the stuff that Sean's been talking about as well. Here's some research just kind of to reinforce what we've been talking about with regards to the broad layoffs. That AI was cheaper at the time, and now kind of things have flip-flopped and gone back the other way. But this is an interesting study to this. Sean, based on the numbers that we're seeing here and what you were talking about earlier, where is the biggest, either the biggest impact that you think can solve this problem now? Because it's, you know, I've already beat the horse to death talking about essentially what the problem is. But your point of view, what are you telling people is the fix to this, and how can they best use humans in the loop to kind of, you know, offset or, you know, invert this so that it's, you know, cheaper with humans becomes now more the de facto standard, and AI is sprinkled in on where it's needed most?
Yeah, I mean, I tell people work smarter, not harder, right? And this goes back to, and again, this is my opinion. For the most part, there are organizations who say we need to get all the people out of business, right? We need to make this quote unquote AI proof, which I think is ironic the way that people use that term. I don't think it is wise for any company to be that automated, because most likely their customers will not be. I remember back in the day, I think it was Albert Einstein who said, you know, physicists are coming up with better ideas, and no, engineers are doing a great job solving problems created by idiots, and God is building better idiots, and God is winning. So, not to call your customers idiots, but it gives you an understanding that, you know, if one side of the equation is completely dynamic in people, AI will never be able to handle everything. And the other part is that, you know, as a business, you need to rely upon people. You know, people are the ones who are going to be care and feeding the AI. So I want to be clear, this to me is yet another example of misinformed business people who are trying to automate everything and push all the people they can out of the business. And what happens is you spend a lot of time on tokens, you spend a lot of time on consultants, And those are much more expensive than having people do this.
Yep.
It reminds me of a conversation I heard about Elon Musk. He spent a year trying to automate putting a seat cover on a seat for a Model 3 car. And then after a while, he realized, like, wait, we're spending how much? How much does it take to just train someone to do that? 5 minutes? And so just use people. Um, you know, Business is about using your smart judgment and figuring out a way to maximize your outcome. And that doesn't mean maximizing AI. It means maximizing your outcome. So I think this is just yet another example where people are taking their eye off the ball. The ball isn't to use AI. The ball is to make customers happy, pay their bills so that you can pay your bills,
grow,
and return some money back to your investors.
Yep.
That is the goal here. If you are trying to be a tech maximum approach, you are basically creating a rule that doesn't exist.
I agree. And, these are all of the obvious things that people should be looking at. To use another quote that came to mind when you were quoting what you just quoted, I'm thinking of the blue collar comedy, specifically Ron White. He's got a famous catchphrase, says you can't fix stupid. Well, here's how we fix stupid. Sean and I are trying to tell you how to fix it. But here's the other thing that I think, in all seriousness, joking aside, is that, these are obvious things. There are inobvious things. There's tangible. That's what Sean and I have been talking about so far. But there's the intangible pieces. And so let's look at 4 examples of what intangible things are. If we look at tactical knowledge, okay, this is hard won, context, judgment. It lives with the people. It lives in their mind. It's their experience. It's things they've gone through. This has nothing to do with prompts, although you can impart some of that wisdom in a prompt, but it's limited. It's not dynamic. It's static. It's written. The AI is going to empirically do what the prompt says. And so it starts and stops right there. And so you're not probably thinking about, in some cases, especially in workflows, when you're looking and thinking about what it is, it's like, okay, well, it's 2 parts. What can a human do contextually that the AI can't do? And more importantly, get to know your staff. Know who is on your, you may have a rock star, you may have a slug. So if you've got a slug, and I gave you the extremes there, the AI probably could be a better fit in that use case. But that doesn't mean it's a long-term fit. It just means you need to maybe find somebody that's there. And that brings up kind of a segue that I almost wish I put it in there now, but as I'm talking through this, I'm thinking the other thing is you have to constantly revisit what AI is doing, where AI is inserted, and you need to revisit this quarterly or semi-annually, at the bare minimum, annually. And so the point here is you need to always be asking, is there a better way? Is this right? Because honestly, this stuff changes so quick, so fast in AI. Things get better and cheaper and whatever, which is why the uptake is gone. But it's not still always the answer. And the problem is if we go down a road too deep for too long, people are not going to study these subjects in college. We're going to have huge vacuums in society where now we're locked in. It doesn't matter how good or how bad AI is. It is what it is, and now we're stuck with it as a society because in order to fix it, we got to revamp. All of the colleges got to come back up to speed. People got to have interest in it. You're talking a decade, potentially a generation or half a generation of lag in destroying our society if we don't handle this right collectively as a whole. Obviously, there's the relationship components here. And that just goes without saying, people talking to people and who knows what, and all of the power. A great example is unemployed. If you're unemployed and you're not networked and you're trying to find a job, you're going to take 10 times as long to find a job than somebody who is well networked, who has a bunch of relationships that they can reach out to. It's always 3 degrees of separation. And so that's how these relationships are and work. This is what humanity is based and built upon. And these are things that maybe senior leadership is not thinking about. And so AIs don't have relationships. They have contextual knowledge based on their training and based on whatever they've been supplemented with, if you're using something like RAG or Graph RAG or anything like that. And so compliance and auditability, this should be like non-stated, but I'll go out and say the obvious. This is a perfect example of where AI can provide continuity and consistency, but the intelligence, the gray areas, the exceptions to the rule, this is where only a human can handle it. And so you really need to look at these much more. And this kind of just sums up everything that we've talked about, and anything that we didn't talk about is nuanced context. I said it earlier, the gray areas. And so these are the things you really, really have to understand in order to fix the issues that you have where you've over allocated or overused AI in your automations, and or just maybe no automation, just AI handles the whole thing from beginning to end. Sean, do you have any items in your head that maybe isn't listed here that you could think of as it ties to intangible things that folks should be looking at before I move on to the next slide?
The other thing that I kind of tell people is at some point, you will want a bigger and better career. You may want to move on. You know, you need to understand that you need to leave a company behind. And a company is not a tax ID, right? It is the people and process and technology they use. Now, I understand technology can become a bigger part of that business solution with AI. That's what I'm doing. That's what everybody I'm talking about doing. But when you say you don't need people, you don't need process, just use AI, I have to push back heavily on that. And I think this data and everything you put together, David, kind of educates why. And all 4 of these are correct. But I would also say in a more personal, narcissistic pitch I would have to somebody is, at some point you will want to go on vacation. At some point you will want to get a raise. You will want to get promoted. If there is nobody around you, above you or below you, you know, then you probably don't need to exist anymore.
Yep. Yep.
You know, I had this conversation with somebody and they're like, I'm a VP. I don't want to reduce headcount because then I'm going to be a director.
Very obvious. Yeah.
And that is the opposite of what we're trying to convey here, right? That is keeping people around even though they're not providing value for personal needs.
Yep.
Right? If you have more people, that means you should be able to create more business value. And if AI is going to make your people 10 times more productive, that means you should be creating 10 times more value.
Yeah, and that's a great segue. I mean, I think that the flow chart kind of can summarize to some extent what you've said there. And it just is kind of almost tongue in cheek and so terse and light, but it does at least prove the point. It shows about the intake of whatever's going on within your intake of process, whether they are your support tickets or your checklist, your daily tactical list. Like maybe you've got, 10 things as a human to do whatever. These are the things that, go and look at your processes. Start with the intake, because everything that happens at your company always starts with the intake. And at some point, you either triage it, you figure out where it needs to be. You have an air traffic controller. These are great uses of AI and great uses of automation where they don't necessarily always cause problems. They can cause delays. They can gum up a system if they get things wrong, But the point here is these are really traditionally great ways: initialization, intent, routing, and then the humans can do what it is that they need to do there. Or you can pass it on to cheaper counterparts where whatever the task may be or whatever needs to happen, especially if it's something like copying and pasting data from source A to source B. I mean, that is crazy. That is a perfect example of, hey, go to the cheaper AI tier. That a human doesn't need to do that. Now, that being said, maybe a human is responsible for checking all output of AI just to make sure that there's nothing there. And then you could use logic to extrapolate what this person's doing and maybe build an AI QA agent on that. That's still always possible. But again, going back to the previous slides where we talk about nuanced context, it's a balancing act. All of this is about balancing. So balancing your budgets, preserving the human staff that you have and retraining them, reallocating them into new roles. It doesn't mean that we can't do this. We just need to figure out how to do this differently. And so at the end of the day, there's some closing things that I want you to keep in mind is that MIT, 77% is narrow. This is talking about computer vision. This is tasks from paper. This is not language work or the models within the pricing. This is about being able to talk about accuracy. And so there's varying degrees of this happening here. The prices, as I described early on, are falling faster than ever. I gave you the analogy of 50 cents a run all the way down to a nickel, a 45% savings. But the problem is the exponential usage uptake has gone through the roof. And it's because they're inaccurately throwing too much stuff at AI that probably doesn't need to be there. And you can control your cost or your spend by simply reallocating and relooking at everything Sean and I talked about here. The problem for most people is that this only is applicable to 18%. So if we look at what is it? I think I even have the book here somewhere. Crossing the Chasm by Godfrey Morse. I had the book there. So anyway, if you've seen the graphic, there's this big hump hill. There's a big gap in the middle. That's the chasm. And it's the same thing. We're just barely on the other side of the chasm. And it depends on the industry. You might still be on the other side of the chasm, but by and large, we are seeing wider spread adoption in 2026. And I would say, at least from my point of view, we have crossed the chasm now. And now we're on the trajectory up. But it depends on how steep that trajectory goes up based on how much AI continues to go, because people are really realizing, holy crap, if I do this, I'm going to spend 2 or 3x more than what I'm currently spending with humans. And maybe the humans aren't so bad. And there's some cases where AI, again, fits, but the adoption is still early. I can't emphasize that enough. We're going to see this play out till the year 2030, 2032, maybe 2033, where we'll start to get to, I would say, 60, 70%. It could change faster. Then again, it could slow down. I think it'll become very, very clear by the end of this year, kind of where things are headed, how fast things are going to either continue at this pace and, God forbid, speed up. But we may even see a slowdown of a pause and people doing exactly what we're talking about here. And that takes time. And the fix, again, is the discipline, not the retreat. We're not saying to throw it in the trash can. You shouldn't do that. But you need to, again, rework everything there. Sean, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I mean, one of the things during a boom and a bust, which is ironically simultaneously happening with this current cycle, is, common sense needs to have a vote.
Mm-hmm.
And, doing right is more important, in my opinion, than keeping whatever role that you have. I know a lot of people have been negatively impacted. 2 a.m. layoff emails with no documentation. There are bad actors out there, right? Don't be one of them, is my point. Make sure your employees anybody who reports to you has a clear understanding. Make sure whoever you report to provides you clarity of what's going on. And it behooves everybody, to constantly be documenting and providing documentation upstairs that says, here's my people, here's my spend, here is the value the company is getting. If you're not doing that, this is a really good time to start.
Yeah. And I wanted to give you guys 3 things to remember so that you can go back to your company, have these conversations. And so you should broadcast this as your own radio station internally. And if you got nothing out of this entire podcast, remember these 3 key points. So that AI, it augments things. It does not replace, okay? Enhance it. It takes what you're doing, it makes it better, or it allows you to increase your volume. It's not and shouldn't be replacing. And this is where, if you jump too quick, you're going to wind up in a quagmire. That's not going to be a good place to be. And you'll have to do some retreating, much like OpenAI and Anthropic's leaders just recently had to do this year. Also, just because prices, again, are dropping, meaning in AI, it's getting cheaper and cheaper to use AI every time you use it. But if you use it in scale and in volume, well, it exponentially goes up. And so then if we start saying is, okay, if I take what a human does, and right now I'm only doing it at 20% to volume of what that individual's doing, you need to kind of figure out if you're going to replace somebody, understand thoroughly and empirically what it is that they do in their day-to-day. Because essentially, you're going to have to figure out and do some math in your actuarial department that says, hey, what's the risk if I let this person go? Just because this is what they do every day, what other knowledge do they have? What other skills? Go back and revisit their resume when you hired them to understand what other skills they may have. So I know this is a long ranted ramble on that part, but you really need to understand what you're doing there before you just throw it at the wall, because it's much cheaper to use now. And then finally, the winners are building hybrid governed workflows. I'm putting a huge emphasis on both hybrid and governed here, because this is the secret to the sauce that we're talking about. It sums it up essentially, I think, in 2 words. So we've kind of gone a little bit longer than I had probably planned to go on to this one, but I think it's a great conversation. It's a great takeaway. Sean, anything else to add before we wrap up?
No. I really think this is a very vital time for people to pay attention. And great job here, David.
Thank you very much. Well, everybody, we are here every, almost said Thursday, every Wednesday at 12 o'clock noon Eastern Standard Time. We had to go on a quick hiatus this last week, so we weren't here, but we're back again. Thank you guys. Every time you show up, we've got some guests that will be joining us soon again. And again, just a reminder, visit the transformationleaderspodcast.com. At the bottom of that website, there's a form. Fill it out. Come join us on the show. And that's it. That's all we have for you this time. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.